My name is Till van Rahden. I teach German and European Studies at the Université de Montréal. I'm here to offer reflections on what democracy feels like, transatlantic vistas in an age of crisis. What happens when we understand democracy not simply as a matter of elections and political parties, laws, and parliaments? How shall we conceptualize the social and cultural foundations of democracy? How significant are quotidian experiences of equality and freedom for the viability of liberal democracies? Such questions were articulated most pointedly by American political thinkers such as Walt Whitman. To the poet, democracy was above all a way of life. To quote Whitman, "Did you too, O friend, suppose democracy was only for elections, for politics and a party name?" He asked his readers only to answer unequivocally, "I say democracy is only of use there that it may pass on and come to its flower and fruits in manners, in the highest form of interaction between men and their beliefs, in religion, literature, colleges and schools, democracy in all public and private life." I invoke Whitman's famous essay on democratic vistas, first published in 1870, in order to challenge a sense of despair that informs recent conversations on the crisis of liberal democracy. Instead of obsessing about how democracies die, it might prove more useful to explore what keeps them alive. How shall we best conceptualize the cultural and social foundations of democracy? In the German context, the most influential thinker to highlight the nexus between a moral order and liberal democracy is Ernst Wolfgang Böckenförde. The legal theorist famously noted that, quote, "the liberal state lives on premises that it cannot itself guarantee." A similar concern about secularism and its discontents is central to Charles Taylor's idea of the social imaginary. A democracy, my fellow Montrealer has argued, is in need of some form of moral consensus that is based not on abstract reasoning, but on lived experiences, social imaginaries, in other words, that allow citizens to embrace democratic principles such as solidarity and equality. According to Taylor, the concept refers to, quote, "the ways people imagine their social existence, how they fit together with others, how things go on between them, the expectations that are normally met, and the deeper normative notions and images that underlie these expectations." My aim here is to suggest why Böckenförde's fears may prove exaggerated and why Taylor's emphasis on a shared morality is more problematic than is often assumed. Conversations about the role of forms, of style, and of manners for democracy as a way of life may contribute to a more nuanced and imaginative understanding of democratic foundations. Questions of form and style may help us in our attempts to square the multicultural circle and to navigate the tension between equality and difference. With this in mind, we can return to the question of democratic theory and revisit at once Böckenförde's fears and Taylor's emphasis on shared thick morality. To privilege forms over substance is to emphasize rules, manners, and conventions over shared values and an ethical consensus. If a genuinely pluralist liberalism is justified in putting moral incommensurabilities first, the cultural foundations of democracy cannot be found in the realm of ethics. A republican constitution, as Immanuel Kant noted, would have to work not just for a nation of angels, but also for a nation of devils. It might therefore be more fruitful to focus less on the moral passion citizens hold and instead analyze how they articulate their ethical sentiments and fears in public. If liberal democracy is as much a way of life as a system of government, it would be short-sighted to focus on civic virtues, shared values, and a common social imaginary. If we understand diversity as the inevitable effect of individual freedom, if we put moral incommensurabilities and questions of cruelty at the heart of our understanding of democracy, we need to fret less about values or social imaginaries and instead explore which forms, styles, and aesthetics stimulate, sustain, and revive democracy as a way of life. An emphasis on democracy as a way of life, therefore, need not lead us to focus on questions of morality and norms. Instead, it invites us to explore democratic forms. Those who view cultural homogeneity as a prerequisite for liberal democracy overlook the fact that a specifically democratic form of civic cohesion emerges not from harmony, but rather from discord. Our ability to accept moral dilemmas that we cannot solve but only navigate, our capacity to grasp what we cannot embrace, presupposes forms and conventions, rules and procedures that allow us to live with deep pluralism. Reflections on ways of life, questions of style and democratic spaces allow us to hone our feel for the cultural and social foundations of democracy. No matter how stable a democratic government may seem, it will wither without ways of life that allow for and encourage democratic experiences. In short, to explore democracy as a way of life is to focus less on how democracy works, but on what democracy feels like. A democratic way of life does not emerge out of thin air. It presupposes a democratic commons, public spaces and institutions that allow for democratic experiences and everyday encounters of citizens. These include public squares and streets, public parks and swimming pools, municipal libraries and museums, kindergartens and playgrounds, youth centers and sports facilities, schools and universities. In other words, places that not only serve the greening of the city, transportation purposes, or education, but invite people to stay and offer a stage for social and political participation. Together, these public spaces, places, and public goods constitute the idea of the common good. They create the framework that allows citizens to cultivate democracy as a way of life. Democracy thrives on opposition, struggle, and discord, but these conflicts can only develop their creative force if we preserve the democratic commons in which we can navigate conflicts and accept ambiguities. The more the signs of a crisis of democracy become apparent, the more evident it becomes how costly it is to cut the budget of those institutions and to neglect those public spaces and places that allow for democratic experiences and a deep pluralism, that strengthen the civic discord of community and a culture of participation and peaceful discord. The infirmity of the democratic commons is a threat to liberal democracy, first as a way of life, then also as a system of government. A democracy that no longer preserves these public goods and cultivates democratic ways of life puts at peril its very social and cultural prerequisites. If we obsess about efficiency and performance, controlling and benchmarking in the public sphere, and privatize public goods because the invisible hand of the market leads to supposedly fairer solutions, we lose our keen sense of democracy as a way of life. Especially in cities, it becomes apparent. The leaner and more efficient the state, the more liberal democracy is endangered. Democracy as a system of government, but above all as a way of life, costs money, and without a strong, effective tax state, it is impossible to sustain it. More than other forms of rule, democracy needs spaces for democratic experiences, forums and forms of civic cooperation and discord, however inefficient such forms of unsocial sociability may be. If we do not want to give up the spaces of democratic experiences that enable us to fill the idea of a society of free and equal citizens with life and meaning, we can no longer afford the withering of our democratic commons and the loss of public goods. Without them, democracy hangs in the air. It will wither and die. It is for us to keep it.